I'm Mark Ryan, this is Super Review, and this is the Moondrop Blessing 3. This is the follow-up to one of my absolute favorite IMs of all time. See, it's almost 3 years ago, actually almost exactly 3 years ago, that I reviewed the Moondrop Blessing 2, and it quickly became my favorite IM, just because it was an excellent mid-range performer, really outstanding mid-range resolution, like vocal content, which you know I love. But if I had one complaint about the Blessing 2, it would have been its treble performance, which was just a little bit so-so. It lacked kind of that really high frequency extension that contributes to just the timbral qualities of things like cymbals and hi-hats and stuff like that. Very nitpicky. But I will spoil right now that the Blessing 3 solves that problem. But is the Blessing 3 strictly an update or an upgrade from the Blessing 2? Well, that's what I wanted to spend more time figuring out. So for the past week and a half or so, I've been listening to the Blessing 3 very extensively, comparing it with the Blessing 2 as well as a handful of other IMs that have come out more recently. And I'm ready to let you know what I think. So in this review, we're going to talk about the Blessing 3, what comes inside the box. We'll talk about the sound quality, what I like, what I don't like, and then we'll get into a bunch of really particular head-to-head comparisons to hopefully answer all your questions about what IM you might buy if you're in this price range. And I forgot to mention it, the price range on the Blessing 3 is still exactly the same as the Blessing 2. They didn't increase the price, so it's still at $320. And I guess on that note, a quick shout out to Shenzhen Audio for sending in the Blessing 3 for review. If you want to check it out, I've got them linked in the description down below. And I guess also the usual disclaimer, this is a live stream. So if you're here now live and you have questions about the Blessing 3 that I don't get to in this review, stick around to the end of the review, ask your questions, and we'll make sure that we answer all of your burning questions. And with that out of the way, I guess let's dive to the table and start talking about the physical stuff that comes with the Blessing 3. We'll talk about the build quality, the fit and comfort, before we talk about the sound. And here you go. Here is your packaging. There is your requisite waifu box art. Honestly, I think it's a pretty nice looking box art. I'm into this. They've gone for kind of a more futuristic aesthetic, as you can kind of see here with the font. That will also play out on the IM itself. But then on the back, you've got the frequency response, a bit of a diagram of the IM itself. But we're not going to spend too much time looking at that, because what's more important is what is inside of the box. And what's inside of the box is what you see here. Nothing more, nothing less. You get this fairly chonky carrying case. It's basically the same carrying case that came with the Blessing 2, just in a slightly different aesthetic. I gotta be honest, I don't love this carrying case. It's very nicely built, don't get me wrong. It's just pretty large. This is not gonna be a pocketable case. This is something you'll probably, put away in a cabinet or leave it on your desk or something like that. But it's nicely built, I suppose. It's got a zip all the way around, and on the inside it is kind of like a felt material with a little pouch over here for your accessories. And there aren't many accessories, to be honest. There are just a bunch of ear tips, which I'll pull into view here. And in fact, you can probably see over there, there's more ear tips than you might normally expect. It seems that they've included basically 2 copies of every size. So you've got small, mediums, and larges, and then you've got 2 different sets of each of those. And I'm not sure exactly why, but my hypothesis of why they've included those is that my experience with these tips in the past with the Blessing 2 is that the bore can kind of stretch out over time, and then the fit becomes a little bit loose on the nozzle. We'll talk about that nozzle in a little bit, but that would be my only guess of why they include a couple of sets, so you kind of have a backup. That said, what's kind of missing here, you might have noticed, is there's no spring tips. Moondrop spring tips are kind of my favorite ear tips to use on the Blessing 2. And well, frankly, that's what I use here on the Blessing 3, but I had to supply my own spring tips. So there you go. They did also include an airline adapter, which is interesting. I was on an airplane pretty recently. I don't even think that they really still use this connector. Maybe there's still planes that use this, but I don't know, a little curious touch that some sellers are still including with their IMs, but that is all that we have in terms of accessories, apart from the IM itself. So let's dive into the specifics on the build quality of this IM, starting with the cable, which I gotta say is one of my favorite Moondrop cables, but not my absolute favorite Moondrop cable. So I think this is a pretty nice little improvement over what we got with the original Blessing 2. The cable is just a little bit softer, it drapes a little bit better. I think aesthetically it looks nicer than the kind of copper or almost pink colored cable that we had on the original Blessing 2. And just generally, pretty good behavior. It can be a little bit memory prone, which you might see here a little bit. There's a little bit of kinking, and it's just slightly stiff versus my absolute favorite Moondrop cable, which is the SSR cable. So I don't think this is quite as nice as the SSR cable, but there are some things that I do like better. Starting with, we'll talk about this very small metal hardware that they've got in this thing. It's even got kind of a matte finish to it, which I like that little touch. So it's just got a nice small Y-split with a very functional chin slider. Yes, Moondrop can do chin sliders, and this is pretty ideal for me. You can see it does not move around, it stays in place. And if you didn't want to use a chin slider, you could just pull it up to the Y-split and kind of looks like there's nothing there to begin with. And then also what I really like about this cable is what I also liked about the SSR cable is that they've got really small hardware up here, right? It's just a plastic piece where it connects the 2-pin connector, and it is a standard 2-pin connector. You can swap cables if you want. But I really like just the small plastic hardware. Some people prefer the larger metal hardware. It looks a little bit nicer and fancier, I suppose, on some other IMs, but I'm just a sucker for the smallness of that plastic solution. And apart from that, I don't know, there's not too much to say about this cable other than, again, it's maybe slightly more memory prone and a little bit stiffer than the SSR cable. And so for that reason, I don't think it's actually better than the SSR cable, but the hardware is definitely better than the SSR cable. So if they could tie this hardware with the Moondrop SSR cable, we would be in for endgame cable territory, and I would have basically zero complaints. But that will bring us into talking about the IM, and as you can see, I'm polishing it off because it is this very, very chromy looking polished steel look. That is, well, quite prone to fingerprints as well as maybe even scratches. I don't know if that, yeah, that's definitely coming across a little bit gross there, right? Just a little bit of a demonstration, and I've showered recently too. But yeah, they have gone for this chrome plated design versus the more brushed steel that they had, or brushed aluminum they had on the Blessing 2. Overall, I think this is actually a better looking IM, but I do wish that it was sort of a matte finish to it. I think it would solve or just avoid some of those problems with fingerprints and showing scratches more easily. But what I do like about the aesthetic here on the Blessing 3 is frankly a lot. Okay, what I like about the shell, or just this outer plate, is I like the dimension that they've added to it, which is subtly angling it, right? And it catches the light like this, and I don't know, I think it's just pretty fun to look at, if I'm honest. What I'm maybe not such a big fan of, and this is a minor point, but the lettering that they've used here for Blessing 3, on the other side, it says Moondrop in the same lettering. It's actually, I don't know, it's not the worst lettering, but I think it would look better without it, if I'm honest. That said, I do think this is an improvement over the aesthetic that they did with the Blessing 2, which was just much larger lettering. And I don't know, I guess I'm just not a big fan of lettering on the sides of my IMs. And I guess on the bright side is this one's actually kind of hard to even see given how shiny and glossy the outer panel is. The rest of the IM is made up of almost exactly the same build as the Blessing 2. It is this fairly large acrylic shell that is 3D printed, and it is solid all the way through. Through it, you can see the drivers, right? Up here near the nozzle, you've got your 4 balanced armature drivers, and they are piped into the nozzle through tubes that you can see, and I really like that. I'm a big fan of clear IMs, just being able to see inside, especially when they are a solid clear, just because it kind of gives it like this glass-like quality where it bends light. And I don't know, I guess I'm a sucker for it. Fairly superficial, but I dig it. But then the other difference here with this IM, in terms of, well, I guess the driver configuration, in fact, the only difference with the driver configuration is that they are using a dual dynamic driver setup instead of the single dynamic driver, which is interesting given that this is not, well, usually dynamic driver is associated with bass, and this is used for the bass. And you would assume maybe they're using double dynamic drivers to get more bass, but it's not. We'll talk more about the sound in a little bit. But as far as how it impacts the build quality, is it just changes up the aesthetic, and it gives it kind of this unique blue touch to it, which I actually am kind of a fan of. Apart from that, the shape of this shell is almost identical to the original Blessing 2. And if you recall, like, that's kind of been a point of contention for a lot of people, is the size of the shell. I would describe this as a medium large fit, okay? If you've got small ears, fair warning to you, this might not fit you very well. For me, it actually fits pretty well. Fit security, we'll talk about the fit maybe a little bit more in a second, but I did want to at least highlight the one thing that Moondrop has done to try and alleviate fit concerns for some people, and that is here at the nozzle diameter. The nozzle diameter on the original Blessing 2 is about 6.3 millimeters in diameter, right? So measuring this way. And 6.3 is fairly large. This is down about 10%. So it's down to about 5.7 millimeters, which, I don't know, maybe that doesn't sound like a ton, but it is, I would say, considerably smaller than the nozzle on the Blessing 2, or at least it is noticeable. And I think 5.7 millimeters is pretty in line with your typical IM nozzle length. So I don't think that the nozzle is necessarily going to be the concern for people, but what might still be the concern for people is more just kind of the bulk here around the entrance to the ear canal, which is still kind of where the bottleneck is for me. Again, it fits me very well, very comfortably, but where I feel it is there. And I'll give you the fit demonstration here. Plug this thing into my ear, and you can see the Moondrop Blessing 3, how it fits. Again, I would describe this as kind of a medium-large fit, and it is a semi-custom molded design, so it fits in and it holds on to my anti-tragus over here. It tucks into the fold of my ear up here. It's got a little bit of a wing up there, and mostly it's just kind of like a lot of bulk down here near the ear canal entrance. For me, it fits quite securely. I was able to sleep through multiple nights, and again, this has been my favorite IM for a long time, the Blessing 2. So I'm very, very comfortable with fitting this into my ear and wearing it for long periods of time. But I know some people have had issues with the fit, and I think it's really just going to come down to your personal ear. And unfortunately, you're probably just going to have to try it out and see how well it works for you. To some degree, you can probably also get used to it if it's not super comfortable initially, as long as it fits in there and it's not, I don't know, stretching anything beyond comfort levels. But what I will say is that the fit security is outstanding for me. This thing just never comes loose, no matter what I'm doing. Again, I sleep through the night. It stays in my ear. And then also sound isolation is on the high end. I wouldn't say it's like the absolute end, I don't know exactly which term I'm looking for. This is not the last word in sound isolation, but it's going to isolate better than your average IM, partly because it's so large and takes up so much space in the ear, partly because it's sort of that semi-custom design, so it kind of fits into the folds, and also just because it is a solid acrylic shell, kind of contributes to that sound isolation. But yeah, generally pretty happy with the fit on the Blessing 3. Yeah, all right, so I think that is as much as I need to say about this physical stuff. Let me check my notes real quick before I miss anything, and no, I think we're good. So we're ready to talk about the sound after I give this thing a quick roadie wrap to make it a little bit more presentable for y'all. Do this, and we'll do a little bit of that. Get it there, catch the light just so, and use your imagination, pretend I just wiped it off and there aren't fingerprints there. And let's talk about the sound here on the Moondrop Blessing 3. Like I typically do, I will start by describing the sound signature before I get into exactly what I like and don't like about the sound. But the sound signature here is probably what you should expect for a Moondrop Blessing, all right? Blessing is, from the Blessing 1, the Blessing 2, they are going for a very neutral sound signature. Some would even call it kind of a clinical sound signature or sound target that they have for the Blessing 2, and that is true here with the Blessing 3. This is a neutral IM. But I would say within the realm of neutral, there are kind of different flavors of neutral. And what I would describe the Blessing 3 as specifically is kind of a vocal forward, somewhat of a lean neutral. There is a bit of a sub-bass bump to it. I don't even know if I would call it a sub-bass boost because it's pretty modest. And this is really just frankly far from a bassy IM. It's just got a nice little pitter-patter to its bass emphasis. But primarily, really, this is a mid-range focused sound signature with, like I mentioned up top, good treble extension. And so that is the general tonality here. What do I like about the sound on the Moondrop Blessing 3? Where to start? I like this IM a lot. I'll just say that up front. My tonal preferences, if you watch this channel before, are generally for a neutral sound signature. And what that basically means is I don't want my sound to be dominated by bass. I don't need a lot of contrast between the bass and the treble to kind of like add flavor or spice to my music. The music that I listen to, I look for music that has that spice built into it. So I don't need an IM to add that contrast. I really just want a clean mid-range and good execution. And that is what the Blessing 3 does. Just gives me a clean mid-range, good execution. You combine that with good music, and that is all the audio joy that I would like. The Blessing 3 does that. It just gives me exquisite vocal reproduction, just really kind of strong sense of clarity on the vocals, a really kind of the word that came to mind when I was listening to the Blessing 2 as well, is just this sense of resolution, this like transparency into the vocal reproduction. I really, really dig that. And the Blessing 3, I think, adds on top of that a little bit better performance of micro contrast and texturing in vocal content. And the Blessing 2 is already no slouch in that. I think a lot of that comes from the better treble extension on this set. And so I would say, okay, yeah. And then, hold on, I'm reading my notes. What was I saying there? All right. Yeah, I'm saying, okay, this is my point that I wanted to make, is that not only am I describing this as like really good vocal reproduction at the price point of $330, this is like some of the best vocal reproduction I've heard in audio, and I've heard a lot of more expensive IMs, and so that should give you a clue into how much I enjoy this IM. And on top of that excellent vocal reproduction, it is just a very solid technical performing set. The treble on this is, I would say, a significant step forward versus the Blessing 2. Again, the Blessing 2 I would describe as having kind of two issues in the treble. One, the extension is a little bit weak, which means that the timbre of high frequency percussions, hi-hats, cymbals, drum brushes, and stuff like that can sound a little bit plasticky versus giving you that solid metallic ping. The extension here on the Blessing 3 solves that. And then the other issue that I had with the treble on the Blessing 2 is that it occasionally could become a little bit sharp, and I think the Blessing 3 avoids that. Maybe that's just cope, but I think that this thing is doing a better job with just avoiding sibilance and just general sharpness, but without really sacrificing anything in terms of incisiveness and delineation in the treble. It just leads to a really distinct sense of separation between sounds, and again, above average imaging because of that extended treble performance. And I would also say that the bass on the set is quite good as well. That's another thing that is very, very good. And again, a reminder that this is not a bassy IM. And again, a kind of a reminder, it was an interesting choice that they went with the dual dynamic driver setup for an IM that is definitely not a bassy IM. But whether it's because of that double dynamic setup, whether it's because of the specific frequency response implementation or something else, I will leave up to sound engineers to really kind of debug and decide. But the listening impression is just, it's excellent. It's very tight, it's controlled, it's rumbly when it's called for. Versus the bass on the Blessing 2, which honestly I didn't really have any complaints about the bass on the Blessing 2, but versus that, I think the bass here is a little bit tighter and it's got kind of like a springiness to it. Like it punches a little bit faster. It does a good job also of communicating sub-bass tonality, which is something that can honestly be a little bit hard to do. And by that, I mean, a lot of IMs that have, a sub-bass emphasis to them, you can get kind of like this droning in kind of effect to the bass if it's not done really well, if that sub bass is not really well controlled. And I think that the Blessing 2, again, not a super bass emphasized IM, so just set your expectations. But where the sub bass is emphasized here, again, it does a really good job of transmitting that tonal content there and not just the rumble. So that is a lot that I like here about the Blessing 3. Are there any things I can complain about this IM? Is there anything I don't like? And yes, unfortunately, there is one thing that I will nitpick about this IM, and I will also say that it is not a trivial thing. The Blessing 3 is, in my opinion, too lean, okay? And specifically what we're talking about, we'll talk about this in terms of frequency response, is kind of where the mid-range transitions into the bass, all right? The transition from mid-range to bass on this IM is heavily in favor of adding clarity to the mid-range, which is not a bad thing per se. It is in fact, a popular bass curve on a lot of high-end IMs. It just is not my favorite bass curve personally. because I find that it comes at the expense of kind of a sense of body and heft behind the music, and it lends the sound to being a little bit more on the sterile side. And now you might be thinking, this guy just described this thing as neutral. He likes neutral, ergo sterile is kind of assumed. But again, I think that there are ranges of neutral, and this is on the side of a little bit too sterile and too lean for my absolute preferences. Okay, typically, this kind of curve will make an IM, in my opinion, just less consistent from song to song, right? The bass contents of this IM are gonna be more dependent on the bass contents of your music versus something that has less of that lower mid-range scoop and a little bit more mid-bass body, right? If you're listening to electronic music that has, gobs of sub-bass frequency, or just gobs of sub-bass baked into the music, or even just honestly most modern production already has, a fair amount of sub-bass into it, you're gonna get a fairly consistent sub-bass experience here, and that's going to give you that good sense of depth. Okay, this is what I typically find, is that bass gives me, there's sort of the mid-range and treble kind of contributes to the width of this sort of stereo image in my head, and the bass kind of contributes to the depth. So if you've got that sub-bass content in your music, the Blessing 3 is going to give you a really good sense of that depth. It is when listening to music specifically that doesn't have a lot of sub-bass content, and this would be maybe some older recordings like classic rock, stuff like that, just generally acoustic recordings, or even more modern recordings that are more vocal based and less maybe electronic based, less digital in their production, where this can be a little bit less consistent. It doesn't have quite that mid-bass punch to it that I think that some other IMs do a little bit better. So that is the reason why, when it came to the Blessing 2 versus the Blessing 2 Dusk, I actually preferred the original Blessing 2 because it didn't have sort of that lower bass or that upper bass, lower mid-range scoop that this has. The original Blessing 2, I think, did that better. The Blessing 2 Dusk had a lower bass, upper bass, lower mid scoop, very similar to this. And that, again, was why I preferred the Blessing 2. In a sense, though, this really is a nitpick in terms of how good this IM at this price. But it is also, in a sense, like hard for me to ignore, especially given that this is the base Blessing 3, and this is probably, they have teased that they're going to be doing a Dusk version of this. They're probably not going to be adding more mid-bass. This is probably as much mid-bass as we will get out of the Blessing 3, unless Moondrop releases the Husk edition, which I think we should start campaigning for. But yeah, those are my thoughts here on the Blessing 3. Really, it is not a minor complaint for me that the lower mid-range upper bass has that scoop, but I also want to be careful and not like overstate it and not like imagine this isn't one of the absolute best IMs at this price range, because I really do think it is, and we'll give it a score in a little bit. But let's for now talk about very specifically how this Blessing 3 compares with a number of other IMs in terms of tonal balance, technical performance, and then also physical form factor. Although, spoiler, these three are basically identical in terms of form factor. So the IMs that we have here on the table, the Moondrop Blessing 3, as we just got done describing, $320. This is a hybrid IM with 2 dynamic drivers and 4 balanced armatures. Here is the Blessing 2, its predecessor, also $320, also a hybrid, but it's just 1 dynamic driver plus the 4 balanced armatures, which is the same here for the Moondrop Blessing 2 Dusk edition, which is also 1 balanced armature for, 1 dynamic driver, 4 balanced armatures, and this one came in at $330. Over here, we've got the Soft Ears Studio 4, which is a 4 balanced armature set, so it's an all BA set. This one comes in at $450, so a little bit more. And this is the Kiwi Ears Orchestra Lite, which is also an all balanced armature set. 8 balanced armatures, comes in at just $250, actually the cheapest one here on the table. And these will be our competitors. These are all some flavor of neutral and all, not exactly the same price range, but I think if you're looking for a neutral set at around this price range, these are the IMs that you really should be considering. And let's talk about how they differ. So the tonality, right? Just in terms of sound signature, the Blessing 3, like we just got done describing, it is neutral, of course. And it sides on being a little bit on the lean side. It favors kind of that crystalline vocal reproduction with a little bit of a sub bass bump and really, really good treble extension for, I think, a significant improvement in terms of high frequency percussion versus the Blessing 2s. The Blessing 2, the original Blessing 2 here, this is also neutral. And for me, this is just like neutral, right? That modifier of describing this as being a little bit lean, I wouldn't apply to the Blessing 2. This is, it's comparatively warmer sound signature, although again, this is not a bassy IM by any stretch of the imagination. It's just got a fuller sense of bass with a less contrasty sound, kind of top to bottom, which makes it just kind of, again, just like this warmer, fuller sound versus the more clinical, leaner sound here on the Blessing 3. The Dusk, also a neutral sound signature, but kind of more similar here to the Blessing 3 in terms of its mid-range and in terms of like that lack of warmth and body. I think the Dusk is more similar here. And then where this is different is that this has got more sub-bass emphasis, to where you could describe this one as a bassy IM, but it's got kind of the same treble deficiencies here as the Blessing 2. Over here to the Studio 4, again, also a neutral sound signature. And I would actually say this is very close to the Blessing 3. It's also kind of a lean neutral sound signature, which has got kind of, you know, that lack of body in the lower mid-range and upper bass. There is maybe a little bit more bass emphasis overall on the Studio 4 versus the Blessing 3. And I would say that like the vocals are not quite as pushed forward here on the Studio 4 as they are on the Blessing 3. So this comes across maybe a little bit less contrasty, but very, very similar in terms of tonal balance between these two. And then finally, we'll talk about the Kiwi Ears Orchestra Lite, which I would say of all the IMs here on the table is probably the most different, probably the closest to not being described as a neutral sound signature, but I think it's still sort of mid-rangey in terms of its tonal balance, but it has the most mid-bass punch of the bunch here on the table. And then the other difference here is that the treble on the Kiwi Ears Orchestra Lite is more relaxed, and sort of that combination of the more emphasized mid-bass plus the relaxed treble gives us just kind of a warmer, fuller sound, a little bit more laid back, actually quite a bit more laid back than the rest of the IMs here on the table. So that is how they compare in terms of tonal balance. I guess if I were to rank them in terms of my preferences for tonal balance, I'd probably still pick the Blessing 2. Next up would be the Blessing 3. And then probably the Studio, and then the Dusk, and then this. But no, that one's actually kind of a tough combination, or a tough choice. But honestly, I love the tonal balance of all of these. It's really just kind of nitpicking between them. This one again being the most different, and its differences are sometimes a good thing, sometimes a bad thing, depending on my mood, honestly. But let's talk about technical performance, where these things differ. And that is where I think the Blessing 3 really is a significant step up versus the Blessing 2, both the original Blessing 2 as well as the Dusk. The bass is tighter. I don't know that it's a significant, massive upgrade in the bass tactility, but it is a little bit tighter, a little bit punchier, and again, a little bit springier. And I think it gives you a little bit better control and delivering that tonal character in the sub-bass frequencies versus the Blessing 2 and even the Dusk edition. Really though, where this thing is improved is in that treble performance, which just gives you, I think, a better sense of imaging. So more of that dimensional and positional information in terms of the soundscape. And then also just gives it better timbre on high frequency percussion. It just sounds, and maybe I should wrap this up into the tonal area, but to me it just sounds like things like cymbals and hi-hats have more of that realistic metalness to them, and that realistic decay that I think the Blessing 3 does really quite well. Now the Blessing 2, make no mistake, is really no slouch at all. Again, at its price point, it is still an excellent technical performer. Excellent mid-range resolution, vocal texturing, really good. And I think the bass is actually better here than it gets credit for, but it does lack sort of that tight springiness that you get here on the Blessing 3. The Dusk, it's basically ditto, almost exactly the same. I will say that the bass maybe can come across with a little bit more of that blam factor versus the Blessing 2, even if it is a little bit less consistent because of the bass tuning. The Studio 4, where I would say this set is standout, is in its head stage and 3D imaging. It does present the bigger head stage for me of all the IMs on this table. The bass, I would say, is not quite as tactile as the basses you will get on these, probably because it's balanced armature, but your mileage may vary on that. Maybe more so where the balanced armatures kind of come into play here is in just the overall timbre of the set. It is less textured than I think these IMs are in terms of vocal content, and it just can kind of sound a little bit smoothed over. And again, I tend to attribute that to balanced armatures. The Orchestra Lite, also being an all balanced armature IM, is kind of similar in that sense, but it does it a little bit differently. I would say that this is the weakest IM on the table here in terms of separation and delineation between sounds. Now, the plus side of that is that you actually get a more cohesive sound, I think, and it tends to be a little bit more on the pleasant side versus like technically impressive side. Again, this is kind of the more laid back, just pleasant tuning sounding IM. You do get more mid bass punch on this set if you're looking for that. If you want more of that body and physicality behind the sound, there is a little bit more there than there is, especially on these two. But if you're looking for that really strong sense of separation between sounds, I do think that is probably where this IM is the weakest. And now finally, let's talk about how they differ in terms of form factor. And honestly, these are all really well built IMs. I love wearing all of these. The Blessing 3, we just got done describing. I think aesthetically it is beautiful. In fact, let's punch in on it so you can enjoy. I do wish it was less glossy so it didn't pick up fingerprints as easily as this, but apart from that, I love the clear shells. I love the fit of this IM, but fair warning that it is a little bit on the large side. And those exact comments, apart from the glossiness, apply here to the Blessing 2 and the Dusk. It does have a matte shell, which I like, although you can see it does accept scratches fairly liberally. And I was never a big fan of the branding that they put here in the Blessing 2. Not a big deal for me because mostly I really like being able to see through the IM. And again, the fit was very good on this IM. Ditto for the Dusk. The Studio 4 is the only IM here that is not a clear shell. That is this black plastic shell, and it is kind of a unique, it's weird to describe an all just a simple one color IM as unique, but there are very few IMs that actually go for this aesthetic, and I really do like the way that Soft Ears executed it here with the Studio 4. The shells are smaller than the Blessing 3 and the Blessing 2, so this will be an easier fit for most people. The one thing I will say about this is that it is an unvented IM. Because it's all balanced armatures, they don't need to have vents in there, so that just means that when you plug it in your ears, you're probably going to get a little bit better sound isolation versus these, and again, these do a good job of sound isolating already. But there might be a little bit of pressure buildup. For me, it doesn't bother me, but some people are very allergic to that pressure buildup. So a fair warning on that. And that also applies here to the Kiwi Ears Orchestra Lite, which is, again, also an all balanced armature design. I love that it's clear and you can see through and see all those drivers. In fact, this is the clearest of the bunch. Because this one I don't believe is 3D printed like the Blessings. It just gives you an even better look at the drivers, and I dig it a lot. But it is also unvented, which means that you're going to get really good sound isolation with the Kiwi Ears Orchestra Lite, but it does come at the expense of giving you a little bit more of that pressure buildup sensation, whereas these are vented, they will avoid that. And yeah, generally the fit quality on this thing is also pretty excellent. So again, I love the build on all of these. I don't know how to rank them in terms of build quality, but I dig them all. But that will lead us into our final conclusion here on the Moondrop Blessing 3. Let me organize it beautifully. I like this IM a lot, okay? In a lot of ways, this is better than the IM that's been my favorite IM for 3 years now. But I would also be lying if I didn't admit that I'm a little disappointed with the upper mid-range, or sorry, the lower mid-range upper bass transition. I think that could be improved here, and again, maybe we'll start the campaign here for a Moondrop Blessing 3 Husk edition that restores that mid bass and gives us a little bit more body to it. But honestly, I can't deny that this is still an upgrade over the Blessing 2, and so it's an easy 5 stars out of 5 for me. And if you want to check it out, of course, I've got it linked in the description down below. And while you're down there, if you found this review helpful, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, ding the YouTube bell, and share this video with someone that you think might be interesting, because that's another way that you can help this channel. If you're here for the live stream, hang around. We will have a chat, and again, I'll answer all your burning questions. And if you're not, well, I'll catch you on the next super review. Have a good week.